Hey guys, tonight we're going to drift back to the late 1930s. A world not yet in flames, but already smelling of smoke. You're going to hear the shuffle of diplomats' papers in dim-lit halls, the creak of train cars carrying soldiers who still think this is all just a drill, and the faint, almost polite rumble of speeches that will soon become the roar of war. The air is heavy with expectation, and you might notice your pulse slowing as you picture it. Not from calm, but from the strange quiet before everything changes. If you were there, truth be told, you wouldn't last long. The politics alone would give you a headache, and the rationed coffee wouldn't help. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your location and your local time. I love knowing where and when you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The decade is folding in on itself. Across Europe, newspaper headlines shift from cautious optimism to edged unease. In Berlin, parades swell beneath banners stitched in red and black, their colors catching sunlight like embers. In London, shop windows still gleam with silver tea sets, though whispers of air raid shelters are starting to creep into casual conversation. In Moscow, the frost bites early, but the voices in the Kremlin stay warm with calculation. You stand in a Berlin street as autumn leaves spin past your boots. A motorcade glides by, polished black cars with curtains drawn, carrying men who speak in clipped, confident tones. You can't hear the words, but you can feel their weight, like stones being stacked, one by one, into a wall. Scholars still debate whether this war was inevitable or if some last-minute twist could have stopped it. Maybe if certain treaties had been firmer or certain speeches softer, the powder keg wouldn't have been lit. But here now, you can almost smell the sulfur. Across the channel, Britain's Prime Minister has just returned from Munich, waving a piece of paper and declaring peace for our time. Crowds cheer, relieved. Somewhere behind the applause, a few voices mutter doubts. You drift to Warsaw, where shopkeepers sweep fallen leaves from stoops and trams rattle past in the cold air. The city feels sturdy, old, and confident, yet its place on the map is like a door caught between two winds. To the west, Germany's ambitions swell. To the east, the Soviet Union watches and waits, a quirky detail. In Paris, fashion houses still hold shows in these tense months. Silk dresses and tailored suits walk down runways as if the world isn't leaning toward chaos. It's almost defiance. One last twirl before the music stops. And then, late at night, in a smoky bar somewhere along the Danube, you overhear a soldier playing a melancholy tune on a battered accordion. No one speaks while he plays. When he's done, they raise their glasses without smiling. It's not war yet. Not quite. But it's close enough that you can feel the edges of it brushing against your sleeve. The air in Warsaw is cold but restless on the first morning of September 1939. You hear it before you see it, the low, rhythmic hum of engines rolling closer. At first, you think it's just another train, but the sound swells, deepens, grows teeth. Then the first planes cut through the clouds, sunlight glinting off their wings like silver knives. You're standing at a street corner when the ground shivers. Somewhere on the outskirts, the first shells land. The city exhales and gasps. Windows slam shut. Shopkeepers rush to pull awnings inside, and trams screech to a halt. You watch a man fumble with his hat as if that's the most urgent thing in the world, his hands trembling against the brim. This is the spark. Germany has crossed the Polish border from the west, tanks grinding forward under the black and white cross. From the east, whispers ripple. Soviet forces will move too, but not yet. not today. The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, signed just weeks before, has already divided the land on paper. Now it will be divided in soil. Historians still argue whether Poland ever stood a real chance against the combined weight of its neighbors. Some say the cavalry charge at Krojanty, Polish horsemen riding against German armored cars, was pure bravery. Others call it romantic folly. Either way, it happened, and it became one of those strange war images that burn into the memory. Horses against metal, a 19th century ghost galloping into the 20th century's deadliest storm. By the second day, the Luftwaffe has turned its attention to Warsaw proper. Bombs fall in daylight, not caring for shadows. Fires bloom where they land, their smoke twisting upward like black ropes. You duck into a stairwell, pressing your ear to the cool stone as the world above shakes loose dust into your hair. A quirky moment. Amid the chaos, an old man insists on sitting in his bakery doorway, selling loaves as if refusing to admit the city is under attack. You see people still buying, clutching warm bread while sirens howl, the crust crackling in their hands. Within weeks, the defense crumbles. Britain and France declare war on Germany in response. But for Poland, help comes too late. On September 17th, the Soviet Union moves in from the east, sealing the country's fate. The map is redrawn not with pens, but with boots and bayonets. You leave Warsaw in a crowded rail car heading south, pressed between farmers carrying sacks of grain and soldiers clutching rifles without ammunition. Through the narrow windows, you watch the countryside slide past. Fields bending in the wind, church spires still standing, and now and then a plume of smoke marking another town's undoing. When night comes, the train stops in a field. No station in sight. You sleep sitting up, lulled by the creak of the carriage and the uneasy rhythm of distant artillery. The war has begun, and though the world is vast, it will find you wherever you go. You arrive in Paris in the soft light of early autumn. The city is awake but muted, as though speaking in a whisper it doesn't want the neighbors to hear. Newspapers are full of the Polish tragedy, but here the war feels suspended. No bombs, no advancing tanks, just a strange, brittle waiting. They call it the drôle de guerre, the phony war. On the surface, life continues. Cafes still serve coffee, though the portions are smaller. Trains still run, though they carry more soldiers than tourists. You walk along the Seine and watch lovers leaning on the railings, speaking in low voices. A jazz band plays in the corner of a riverside bar, each note bouncing off the cobblestones like it refuses to surrender to gloom. Historians still debate whether this period was prudence or paralysis, whether Britain and France needed the time to prepare or simply failed to act when the moment mattered. The Maginot Line stands to the east, concrete and steel and quiet confidence. But a wall is only strong if no one walks around it. You spend a week drifting between Paris and the smaller towns to the north. In Calais, soldiers dig trenches in the wet earth, their breath rising in clouds as they joke about Christmas leave. One man shows you a postcard from home, a picture of his dog wearing a tiny knitted sweater. He's convinced he'll be back to see it by spring. Then, in April 1940, the stillness cracks. Not here in France, but far to the north. Germany sweeps into Denmark and Norway. In Copenhagen, it's over in hours. In Norway, the fight lasts longer, snow mixing with smoke in the fjords. A quirky detail. In Narvik, some Norwegian troops wear white capes for camouflage, looking like ghosts flitting between the rocks. From the cafes of Paris, you can almost feel the temperature of the war changing. The music is still playing, but it's quieter now, like the musicians know they'll be packing up soon. And then comes May. The German army moves west with a speed that feels impossible. The Ardennes supposedly impassable for tanks, becomes a highway of steel. France's defenses bend under the weight of the blitzkrieg, and the waiting game is suddenly over. You're on a road outside Lille when the first refugees appear. Families on bicycles, pushing carts piled with mattresses and pots. The hum of German engines follows them like a second shadow. Someone hands you a piece of bread as they pass, without breaking stride. By the time you reach the coast, the air smells of fuel and salt, and you understand that the real storm has begun. The road to Dunkirk is choked with people. You walk against the current for a while, pressed between carts, bicycles, and the occasional abandoned car with its doors flung open. The sound of boots in the gravel blends with the low drone of aircraft somewhere out of sight. Above, the sky is pale, almost gentle, until the distant thunder of artillery rolls in like a reminder. You reach the edge of the port town and see the sea for the first time in days. The water is calm, but the beaches are a sea of their own, a sea of khaki and exhaustion. British, French, Belgian soldiers wait in long, wavering lines that stretch from the dunes to the water's edge. Some sit with helmets in their laps, staring at the horizon as though they can will the ships into view. This is Operation Dynamo, though no one here calls it that. It's just escape, if escape can be managed under the eyes of the Luftwaffe. You can smell the smoke from burning oil tanks inland. The air tastes metallic, a quirky detail. Some soldiers make tea on the beach, heating small tins of water over improvised stoves of sand and driftwood. The ritual is stubborn, almost absurd, but it steadies their hands. Historians still puzzle over how it worked at all. How the little ships of England, fishing boats and pleasure craft, threaded their way across the channel under threat from the sky, ferrying men from the shallows to the larger vessels waiting beyond the sandbars. You wade into the surf, boots heavy, as a small motor launch pulls up. The deck is already crowded, but hands reach out for you. The boat rocks hard as another man climbs in, and the engine coughs before catching. From the water, Dunkirk looks smaller than it feels, just a cluster of roofs, a thin ribbon of beach. But the sound of it follows you far out. The distant thud of shells, the whine of diving planes, the shouts of men in languages that don't need translation. Back in Britain, the newspapers will call it a miracle. Here, in the salt and diesel fumes, it feels less like a miracle and more like a breath you've been holding for too long. You land in Dover in the gray light of morning. The docks are quiet except for the shuffle of boots and the clink of tin mugs being filled with tea. No speeches, no parades, just relief and the unspoken knowledge that the war is far from over. The next tide will carry you somewhere else. You find yourself on a quiet street in London, early summer 1940. The air smells faintly of petrol and wet stone after a night rain. Children in school caps walk briskly with their mothers, glancing up every time a plane passes overhead. The city is bracing itself, not with walls or moats, but with watchful eyes and the hum of readiness. Britain now stands alone against the weight of the Axis in Europe. Across the Channel, the German army occupies France, and the next logical step, at least in the enemy's eyes, is to cross the water. Operation Sea Lion, they call it. But first, the skies must be theirs. You wander into a small tea shop near Charing Cross. The radio murmurs in the corner, reporting on air battles over the southern coast. The woman behind the counter serves tea in chipped porcelain, steady hands betraying no fear. She tells you her son is with the RAF, flying out of Biggin Hill. He says it's like chasing shadows, she adds, eyes on the kettle. A quirky moment. In between dogfights, pilots sometimes lounge in deck chairs outside their dispersal huts, drinking tea and tossing apples back and forth. You imagine them listening for the scramble bell the way some people listen for the dinner bell, Except this one means you could be in the air, fighting for your life, within minutes. Historians agree that radar, then still a new invention, was Britain's quiet edge. You see one of the tall, skeletal masts rising from the coastline, humming faintly in the breeze, invisible waves scanning the channel for incoming aircraft. By August, the Battle of Britain is in full swing. You stand in a meadow outside Dover, watching contrails twist and knot in the sky like silver threads in a furious loom. The noise is impossible to ignore. Engines roaring, guns rattling in bursts, the sharp dive of a Messerschmitt chased by a Spitfire. The fighting is far above, but you feel it in your bones, each burst of gunfire like a tap on the chest. The Luftwaffe turns to bombing cities at night. The Blitz. London, Coventry, Liverpool, and others feel the heat and dust of falling bombs. You spend one night in a London underground station, the arched tunnels lined with camp beds and blankets. Someone plays a harmonica near the far wall. Children sleep with their heads on their mother's laps, while the ceiling trembles faintly with each distant impact. You emerge the next morning to find smoke curling above the rooftops, but the milk still being delivered on schedule. People step over rubble to queue for bread. Somehow, life persists. The battle rages for months, but Britain never falls. The invasion is postponed indefinitely. And though the victory feels fragile, it's a kind of proof that the island can stand even with the wind against it. The sky over the channel clears for now, but the war's reach is already stretching elsewhere. The map of the war spreads outward, as though someone has spilled ink across it. Italy, under Mussolini's banner, steps fully into the fight. The Mediterranean, once a glittering tourist escape, becomes a chessboard of naval clashes and convoy routes. You stand on a dock in Taranto, the smell of salt and diesel mingling in the air, watching Italian warships at anchor. Their crews move briskly, yet there's a nervous energy in their steps. Italy's ambitions reach into North Africa, where desert winds carry the sound of engines farther than you'd think possible. You arrive in Alexandria just as British troops prepare to push westward. The sun here feels heavier, pressing down on the sand until it shimmers. A soldier tells you that the desert can be your best ally or your worst enemy. It hides you in the heat haze, but it also swallows your strength. A quirky image. Soldiers wearing makeshift goggles cut from old tin cans, the edges padded with cloth to keep out the blinding sand. They look like something from a science fiction serial. But in the desert, fashion bows to function. Historians still debate whether Italy's campaigns in North Africa were doomed from the start or might have succeeded without Germany's eventual intervention. What is certain is that the arrival of the Afrika Korps under Erwin Rommel changes the rhythm entirely. The desert fox moves with speed and unpredictability, forcing the British into a dance of attack and retreat across dunes and rocky ridges. Meanwhile, the Balkans feel the tremor. You step into Athens on a clear morning and find the city buzzing with news. Italy has tried to invade Greece and failed. Greek resistance, stubborn and fierce, pushes them back into Albania. Crowds in the cafes lift their glasses, proud and defiant. But it's a victory that will draw darker clouds, for Germany will not ignore it. By spring 1941, German troops pour into Yugoslavia and Greece. You see paratroopers descending over Crete, their chutes blooming in the sun like pale flowers, beautiful from afar, deadly up close. The island falls after fierce fighting, and the Mediterranean is now ringed in Axis presence. Back in North Africa, the war becomes a cycle of advance and retreat, measured in miles of sand gained and lost. You ride in the back of a supply truck, the desert wind sharp against your face, passing burned-out vehicles half buried in dunes. The stars here, when night falls, are so clear and close it feels wrong that the world below is tearing itself apart. And somewhere, beyond the shifting sands, another front is about to open, one vast enough to swallow all the rest. It begins before dawn on June 22nd, 1941. You're in a small Belarusian village when the quiet shatters, the rumble of artillery in the east, the whine of aircraft slicing through the sky. Operation Barbarossa has begun. Germany's armies, millions strong, pour across the Soviet border in a surge so wide it feels like the horizon itself is moving. You stand on a dirt road as columns of tanks roll past, their treads grinding the earth into powder. Behind them come trucks packed with soldiers in gray, rifles slung, eyes forward. The air smells of fuel and churned soil. Somewhere far off, a church bell rings, its sound swallowed by the thunder of guns. Historians agree that this was the largest military invasion in history, its scale almost beyond comprehension. Yet there are details so small they stick with you. A Soviet farmer trying to herd his cows away from the road as panzers approach, a German soldier stopping to light a cigarette with a match cupped against the wind. The early weeks are a storm. Minsk falls, then Smolensk. You board a crowded train heading east with evacuees. The windows coated in dust, the passengers silent except for a child asking if their home will still be there when they come back. No one answers. The Soviet retreat is brutal but deliberate, burning crops and towns to deny the invaders supplies. You see whole fields set alight under a red sunset, the smoke curling upward like black rivers in the sky. A quirky moment. In Moscow, loudspeakers play music in the streets between air raid warnings, marches and folk songs meant to stiffen the spine. By December, the German advance reaches the outskirts of Moscow. You trudge through snow as Soviet troops dig in, frost stiffening their scarves. The city is cold enough to bite through your boots. Then, in a twist that historians still analyze, the winter and a fierce Soviet counteroffensive push the Germans back. The tide doesn't turn fully, but it stops moving forward. Further south, the siege of Leningrad begins. A tightening ring that will last 872 days. You walk its frozen streets, past statues covered in snow, hearing the hollow quiet of a city cut off from the world. Bread rations shrink, and still people find ways to celebrate New Year's Eve with a candle and a shared song. Here, on the endless plains and in the snowbound cities, you realize the war has entered a different kind of scale. One where the distances are vast, the winters endless, and the cost measured in more than territory. By the time 1941 turns toward its close, the war already feels like it has engulfed half the globe. But on the morning of December 7th, you wake to the sound of urgency in voices that should be calm. You're thousands of miles from Europe now, standing on the docks of Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. The sky is a flawless blue at first, then ruptures into black smoke and silver arcs of aircraft diving low over the harbor. Japanese planes, their wings marked with the rising sun, streak across the water, releasing bombs and torpedoes that send geysers of seawater and fire into the air. The battleship Arizona erupts in a roar that rattles your teeth. The oil slick on the surface catches fire, turning the water into a sheet of flame. You duck behind a crate as machine gun fire peppers the dock. Historians agree this attack, in less than 2 hours, changes everything. It brings the United States fully into the war. But small details linger. Sailors leaping into the oily water to escape the inferno. A chaplain kneeling beside the wounded with smoke curling in the air. A band's instruments abandoned mid-song when the first bombs fell. The very next day, the U.S. declares war on Japan. And within days, Germany and Italy declare war on the United States in turn. The conflict is now truly global. You board a troop transport out of San Francisco in early 1942, the Pacific stretching endlessly in every direction. The air smells of salt and fresh paint. The decks busy with soldiers playing cards and writing letters home. Somewhere in the hold, crates are marked sea rations in black stencils. The first battles you hear of are far from the American mainland. Coral Sea Midway, names that will become anchors in history. At Midway, in June 1942, 4 Japanese aircraft carriers are sunk, shifting the momentum in the Pacific. A quirky image. Pilots returning from battle with bullet holes punched clean through their wings, grinning like you step onto the hot, dusty ground of North Africa once more. But it's not the same as before. The year is late 1942, and the Allied forces have launched Operation Torch. Landings in Morocco and Algeria aimed at squeezing the Axis from both ends of the desert. You arrive in Oran just after the beaches are secured, the smell of cordite lingering in the air. The streets are a jumble of French colonial architecture, palm trees, and soldiers from half the world. British, American, Free French. They mingle in the cafes, trading cigarettes for stories. A quirky sight catches your eye. A group of soldiers leading a camel through the square, its hump draped with a U.S. Army blanket. Historians note that this was the first major American ground operation in the European North African theater. It wasn't flawless. Miscommunication, mixed loyalties, but it planted a foothold. You ride with a convoy eastward, the road stretching between rocky ridges, the sand shifting in the wind. By early 1943, the fighting concentrates in Tunisia. You hear Rommel's Afrika Korps is retreating, pushed by the combined weight of British 8th Army advancing from Egypt and Allied forces pressing from the west. In the Kasserine Pass, the terrain turns the battle into a twisting puzzle of ridges and gullies. You scramble up a slope, dust in your teeth, as gunfire echoes in the valleys. The surrender comes in May. Axis forces in North Africa lay down their arms, over 250,000 men taken prisoner. The desert, once alive with engines and movement, grows quiet again, but there's no pause. The next step is across the sea, to Sicily. In July, Operation Husky unfolds. You land near Gela, under a sky split by the roar of aircraft. The locals peer from shuttered windows, watching the tides of war wash over their island. A quirky moment stays with you. British paratroopers dropping into the dark night, some blown off course and landing in olive groves, startling goats into bleating protests. The push up through Sicily is fast, but not without cost. By August, the island is in Allied hands, and Mussolini has been deposed in Italy. Yet Germany moves quickly to fill the vacuum, turning Italy into another battleground. You cross into the Italian mainland at Salerno in September 1943. The beaches are wide and open, the kind of place where tourists might once have walked barefoot. Now they're lined with barbed wire and the sharp outlines of defensive guns. You can hear church bells ringing inland, strangely steady amid the chaos. Italy will be a slow, grinding climb northward, and winter is coming to meet you on the way. Hay just played a dangerous game and won. Meanwhile, across the world, the Atlantic is a deadly highway. German U-boats hunt merchant ships in wolf packs, their periscopes breaking the surface for only a moment before vanishing. You ride a convoy ship from Halifax to Liverpool. The nights blacked out. The horizon always watched. Some sailors swear they can smell a submarine before they see it, though historians would call that a myth. By the time you set foot again in Britain, the war's rhythm has shifted. No longer defensive, but inching toward the thought of striking back. Plans are forming. But for now, the war still pulls in every direction at once. The autumn rains turn the Italian hills into rivers of mud. You slog up narrow roads where each step feels heavier than the last, your boots pulling free with a sucking sound. In the distance, snow already dusts the Apennines, though it's only November 1943. The front line here isn't a straight mark on a map. It's a knot of rivers, ridges, and stone towns that have stood for centuries. The Gustav Line, the Germans call it. A chain of defenses stretched across the width of Italy. At its heart sits Monte Cassino, crowned by a monastery that has looked out over the valley for more than 1,000 years. You stand at the base one gray morning, the clouds low, wondering how such a peaceful place could be caught in the middle of this. Historians still debate whether the bombing of Monte Cassino in February 1944 was necessary. The monastery, reduced to rubble, becomes a fortress for the defenders instead of a neutral landmark. You hear the artillery echo off the valley walls, a rolling thunder that feels like it could crack the sky. Between the battles, life is reduced to small moments. Sharing a tin of stew with another soldier under a makeshift tarp, finding an abandoned vineyard and tasting a grape that somehow survived the season. A quirky image. Laundry lines strung between tanks, uniforms swaying in the mountain breeze. The advance is slow. You cross the Rapido River under moonlight, the water icy against your legs. The sound of boots splashing is swallowed by the night, only to be replaced by the sudden chatter of machine guns ahead. By May 1944, after months of bitter fighting, the Allies finally take Monte Cassino. The road to Rome opens. You march into the city in June, the streets lined with civilians waving flags, tossing flowers into the path of the troops. For a brief moment, the war feels far away, but news travels quickly. There's another front to the west, one that could decide the war in Europe. You leave Rome with the echo of bells in your ears, bound for the Channel coast once again. You arrive in southern England in the spring of 1944, and the air hums with preparation. Every field seems to be filled with tents, vehicles, and the smell of diesel. The roads are thick with convoys of trucks, their canvas flaps tied down tight, and in the hedgerows, you catch glimpses of soldiers practicing with maps spread across the grass. This is no ordinary buildup. You sense it in the way the officers speak in clipped tones, the way supplies pile up like they're bracing for a storm. Operation Overlord is its name, though few outside the planning rooms know that yet. A quirky sight stays with you. Whole villages draped in camouflage netting to hide parked tanks from enemy reconnaissance planes. Even the cows seem unimpressed, chewing in the shade of Sherman tanks as though they've always been there. Historians agree that the deception operations, fake armies, inflatable tanks, phony radio traffic, were as critical as the real preparations. You walk along the southern coast, staring out at the Channel, and somewhere beyond that gray water lies the occupied shore of France. On the night of June 5th, you step aboard a landing craft, the air thick with anticipation and salt spray. The sea is restless, and so are the men, some joking, some quiet, all knowing tomorrow's date will be remembered. Dawn on June 6th, 1944, D-Day. You land at Omaha Beach under a pale, rising sun. The air is filled with the hiss of waves, the sharp crack of rifles, and the thud of artillery from the cliffs above. You push forward through wet sand, the weight of your gear doubled by seawater. The sound is overwhelming, engines roaring, orders shouted over the wind, the metallic ping of bullets on landing craft hulls. By nightfall, the beachheads are secure. Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juneau, Sword, names that will carry the memory of this day for decades. You walk inland through hedgerows, heavy with summer growth, the air smelling faintly of crushed grass and smoke. The liberation of France has begun, and the road ahead will cut through villages, fields, and cities that have waited years to hear foreign boots as a sound of freedom. Normandy in June is all green fields and narrow lanes, but now the hedgerows hide more than cows and wildflowers. You move cautiously along sun-dappled paths, the air smelling of earth and gunpowder. Every turn could conceal an ambush. The fighting here isn't about wide-open maneuvers. It's a slow, grinding push, village by village, hedge by hedge. Historians call it the Battle of the Bocage. Bocage meaning the dense, ancient hedgerow country of northern France. It's beautiful in the way a puzzle is beautiful. Intricate, twisting, impossible to rush. Tanks struggle to see over the earthen walls, and infantry sometimes fight at distances so close you can smell the other side's cooking fires. A quirky adaptation emerges. Steel hedge cutters welded to the front of Sherman tanks, allowing them to burst through the walls like battering rams. You watch one lurch forward, chewing through dirt and roots, spilling light into a once-hidden field. By late July, Operation Cobra tears open a gap in the German lines. You ride with an armored column through the breach, dust rising in great clouds behind you. Towns liberated along the way greet the Allies with wine, bread, and flowers. In one small village, an old man insists on playing his accordion in the middle of the street, his tune nearly drowned by the rumble of tanks. Paris is the prize ahead, though it's not part of the original plan to take it so soon. In August 1944, the French resistance rises within the city, barricades sprouting overnight. You enter Paris on a warm morning, the smell of bread from reopened bakeries mingling with exhaust fumes from armored vehicles. Crowds flood the streets, cheering, waving tricolor flags, tossing flowers at your feet. You pause at the foot of the Eiffel Tower, its steel frame glinting in the sun, and realize this is the first time in years the city feels like itself. But the war is far from over. The road east still stretches long toward the German border, and the autumn clouds are already gathering. Autumn 1944 paints Europe in muted golds and grays as you march eastward. The air smells of wet leaves and distant wood smoke, and the days are already shortening. The Allies advance toward Germany, but the progress slows. The Siegfried Line, rows of concrete dragon's teeth and fortified bunkers, marks the edge of the Reich. Historians agree that by this point, German forces are battered but still dangerous. You cross into the Hürtgen forest, where the canopy turns the daylight into a dim green haze. Rain seeps into everything: boots, rifles, blankets. It's a place where even the birds seem to keep quiet. A quirky image stays with you. Supply mules trudging through the mud alongside jeeps, their breath steaming in the cold. In December, the war takes a sudden, sharp turn. You're stationed near the Ardennes when the morning silence is broken by the deep thud of artillery. Operation Watch on the Rhine, the Battle of the Bulge, has begun. German troops surge forward through the snow, aiming to split the Allied lines. You find yourself in Bastogne, a Belgian town that becomes the center of resistance. Supplies run low, snow falls heavier, and the cold bites through every layer. Soldiers huddle around makeshift fires in tin barrels, their faces lit orange in the dark. Historians still debate whether the German gamble ever had a real chance. But for those here, it feels perilously close. A famous moment unfolds. When the Germans demand Bastogne's surrender, Brigadier General McAuliffe replies with a single word: nuts. The message is passed from soldier to soldier, sparking tired grins even in the freezing air. By January 1945, the offensive is spent. The snow begins to melt, revealing churned fields and silent villages. You know the next step will be into Germany itself. And that crossing will not just be a military act. It will be a step into the war's final, most decisive months. Winter begins to loosen its grip as you cross the Rhine in March 1945. The river is wide and fast here, the current glinting under a pale sun. Engineers have thrown up pontoon bridges in record time, their steel frames humming under the weight of tanks and trucks. You walk across with the sound of rushing water beneath your boots, knowing that once this barrier is passed, the heart of Germany lies open. Historians often note the unexpected capture of the Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen, a rare stroke of luck in a war where luck is scarce. You visit it just days after it's taken, the great steel arches still standing despite bomb damage. Soldiers cross in steady streams, pausing only to look up at the jagged holes in its frame. Germany now feels different. Quieter in some places, shattered in others. You pass through towns where half the buildings still stand, their curtains swaying in broken windows, and others where only the street signs remain upright. A quirky scene. Children playing marbles with spent shell casings, their laughter echoing in empty squares. In April, you approach the Elbe River, where Allied forces halt to await a link-up with Soviet troops advancing from the east. News spreads of Hitler's bunker in Berlin, of battles raging in the city streets. You hear rumors. Some say he's fled. Others insist he'll fight to the last. Historians still sift through the accounts. But for you, it's only background noise to the sense that the war's end is finally in sight. The meeting with the Soviets at Torgau is quiet, almost anticlimactic. Two groups of soldiers from opposite ends of the war shake hands on a battered wooden bridge, posing for photographs that will circle the world. Yet even in these final days, the air carries a strange mixture. Relief, exhaustion, and the hollow awareness that victory will not bring back the years or the people lost along the way. May 1945 arrives with a strange quiet. The last weeks have been a blur of movement. Columns of German soldiers surrendering, towns hanging out white sheets from windows, and Allied troops fanning out to secure the final pockets of resistance. You move through the countryside where spring flowers have pushed through churned soil, almost as if nature has been impatient for the war to end. On May 7th, word comes. Germany has surrendered unconditionally. By the next day, May 8th, VE Day, the news is everywhere. In London, Paris, New York, and Moscow, crowds flood the streets in celebration. Here in the small town where you find yourself, the joy is quieter. Church bells ringing for the first time without warning sirens, children chasing one another down the cobblestones, and people lingering outside just to feel the sun on their faces. Historians agree that this was the official close of the war in Europe. But it didn't mean all fighting had stopped. Across the world, the Pacific War still burned. You stand by a field radio, listening as reports come in from Okinawa, Iwo Jima, and the skies over Japan. A quirky detail from the celebration sticks in your mind. A soldier handing his last chocolate bar to a little girl who had never tasted one before. She bites into it carefully, as though it might vanish if she's not gentle. As summer deepens, the news from the Pacific grows more intense. You hear about the atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August, events that bring the war's final surrender within days. Historians still debate every aspect of that decision, its necessity, its morality. But for you, the message is simple. It is over. By September 2nd, 1945, aboard the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay, the last signatures are placed on the documents that end the war completely. The world breathes out for the first time in 6 years. Now, with the weight of history pressing softer, you can finally step back, the echoes of marching boots fading into the long hush that follows. The wind down will follow here as the guns fall silent in your mind's ear. The night air around you feels warmer, easier to breathe. The world that once vibrated with tension now drapes itself in the stillness of early evening. You picture those empty fields in France, the streets of Paris, the quiet rivers of Germany, all resting under the same sky. Your footsteps slow until you're not walking at all, just standing, feeling the soft pull of time carrying you forward. The faces you saw along the way blur into the gentle murmur of memory, like voices behind a curtain. And somewhere in that distance, the faint sound of bells. Not for warning this time, but for peace. Let it all drift now. The names, the dates, the battles, until they are only whispers, the kind you can hear only when you are half asleep, eyes closed, heart steady. History holds you gently now, its weight lighter than before. You let it, and you rest.